Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. Thanks for tuning in, and I know I have a few new subscribers, so thank you for that. I hope to entertain you, and I hope that you stay. So today is going to be part 2 of my May wrap-up. Altogether in the month of May, I read 11 books. 3 of those were audiobooks, and 1 was a graphic novel. I've already wrapped up the first 6 books in the May wrap-up part 1, which will be linked below. And so I'm going to talk about the last 4 books that I finished. The first of those was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, and this is on the Great American Reads list, which is a list of books put out by PBS ranking America's favorite 100 books. And I plan to read all 100 of those books. So I reread The Joy Luck Club. I originally read this my junior year of high school. I didn't remember much about the specific story, only kind of the premise of we have Chinese mothers and who have immigrated to the United States in the San Francisco Bay Area, and their 4 Chinese American daughters, and the interplay between mother and daughter and the cultural issues issues of holding on to their Chinese culture of their family and assimilating into the US. So that's basically what I remembered going into it. I remember the game Mahjong plays a role in it, although actually much more minor than I thought that it did. And this was a really great reread. I gave this 4 stars this time around. I think it really paints, regardless of the cultural aspect of it, it paints a really genuine picture of the relationships between mothers and daughters and how complicated that can be, and then with the added complexity of the cultural components. Some of the stories in this book really show us how we can be the most cruel to the person who loves us the most. I know that really resonated with me, as it is way too easy for me to be really hard on my mom. And I say when I was a kid, I very rarely did bad things, but I said bad things or said things badly with a lot of attitude, and it still can creep into our relationship now, even though I love my mom greatly, and we have a great relationship. Even in really strong mother-daughter relationships with great communication, that there's a tension that still exists, and that was explored really well in this, particularly when we get to see when a daughter gets to find out more about the mother's perspective and understand how much love there was that whole time when the daughter wasn't understanding the mom's point of view. So I think that Amy Tan did a really nice job of portraying these really complex relationships quite simply, in a way that was very relatable. Now, I have seen some criticism about not if you just took this book on its own, but this is the only Amy Tan book I've read, so I wouldn't come up with this criticism necessarily just for this book, but apparently in many of her other books, it's common that her Chinese characters or Chinese American characters end up marrying white Caucasian characters. And so that is the case in a couple of these characters. One of the mothers and daughters has the last name St. Clair or Sinclair, because the Chinese mother marries a white man. It seems like that would be a perfectly normal thing to occur from time to time, as it does. Another just kind of side point that made it a little bit more personal for me is it takes place in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I'm from Northern California, about 100 miles east of San Francisco, and so there are every now and then there are places or references that I get. I know exactly where that is. I'm a big San Francisco Giants fan, and there was a reference at one point to the Giants, so I really appreciated that. I'm not clamoring for more Amy Tan necessarily, but if you have a recommendation for an Amy Tan book that you really like, I certainly would enjoy reading more of her work. Next up is a nonfiction book, and it took me way too much time to read this book. Nothing to do with the book, I just wasn't focused on reading this book, and I will definitely reread this in the future as it is very helpful. This is Deep Work by Cal Newport. I gave this 5 stars. Cal Newport gives us a breakdown of, first he explains what deep work is and why we need it and how distracted we actually are. Generally in life, particularly when we're at work, and he explains the difference between deep work versus shallow work. So just for an example, answering your emails, scheduling appointments with, scheduling meetings or attending meetings or scheduling appointments with your clients, those are examples of shallow work. It doesn't take a great deal of concentration and brain power to do that. But if, let's say that you are creating a new, marketing strategy for whatever your product is, that is deep work time that you need to be completely distraction free for. And so he goes into some detail about kind of the, lightly touches on a little bit of the neuroscience in distraction and attention. And especially in this so connected world, we're far more distracted than we think we are. And I really find focusing and concentrating on anything, even reading, for longer than like 10 minutes at a time, it's really pathetic. My mind starts wandering. So I will actually do kind of exercises, set a timer for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, literally throw my phone across the room and not allow myself to touch it. I might still think about it, which is alarming, but I will force myself into that reading time. What I need to start doing is applying this more to working time. So he initially sets up the idea of deep work versus shallow work, explains how distracted we are and why that's such a problem. And then he goes into the rules. So he gives multiple rules for how to get into deep work. And what's really great is he uses examples from big companies who have employed various strategies, whether it has to do with the physical, like the architecture, the layout of an office building, or individuals who have done immense individual work, like he himself talking about papers he's publishing and the way that he breaks down his time. So I found this really, really helpful. I am almost positive I'm going to reread this possibly soon because I really need to get into some deep work myself. So part of my May reading month was BookTube Made Me Do It. And Jen Campbell is a booktuber and writer who inspired the next 2 books. She actually wrote one of them. But first, this is a book that is one of her favorites. That is The Dumb House by John Burnside. This book is very dark and disturbing, but so good. I gave this 4 stars. Luke is our main character and he's our narrator. It's told in his first person point of view. And when he was a child, his mom told him the story of the Dumb House experiment, which was an experiment done to test the innateness of language in humans. So they took newborn babies and raised them up in silence, essentially, to see if language was innate or if it was a learned, kind of nature versus nurture idea. So as a young boy, this idea really stuck with Luke, and he has a fascination that really grows to an obsession about kind of language versus cognition. The soul, is the soul a physical thing? And he starts, as a young boy, experimenting on animals, and basically as he grows, his obsession grows and his experiments grow more and more complex and sinister even. So what I found really interesting, first of all, I have a master's degree in speech language pathology, and so the whole idea of the innateness of language and the nature versus nurture aspect of language was fascinating to me, and so I was really driven to keep reading because I wanted to know the outcomes of his experiments. And I was kind of amazed that I had never heard of this book kind of from the speechy world, but this book has all of the trigger warnings, basically. Violence, questionable consent regarding sexual relations, abuse of children, all sorts of things. But what's kind of interesting is because it's told from Luke's first person perspective, what should be really horrific and if told in another voice from another perspective, like this could be a thriller even. Based on the things that happen in the book, but because it's told from his first person perspective, they don't seem to be as horrific as they should be. So I found that aspect kind of interesting. And although I have not read Lolita, any conversation I've had or any talk of Lolita that I've heard, there's kind of a similar aspect to that you catch yourself kind of rooting for something that you shouldn't be rooting for. So I found that to be really an interesting aspect of this book, because like I really wanted to know the outcome of this experiment, but in order to know the outcome of the experiment, he has to complete the experiment, which does not bode so well for the children involved, which, by the way, are his children. And that's not a spoiler. That's right on the blurb on the back of the book. So if you're looking for something really intriguing, thought-provoking, and a bit sinister, check out John Burnside's The Dumb House. The next Jen Campbell inspired book is actually written by Jen Campbell. This is her short story collection, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. This is a whimsical, fantastically dark, fairy tale inspired short story collection. I could have blazed through this like in a day, but I really wanted to savor these stories and only allowed myself to read 2 to 3 at a time, sprinkled throughout the month. And it was like Jen was tickling my brain with her prose and imagery and imagination. The titular title, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, is a conversation between a husband and wife in the middle of the night. There's so many great stories in this, and I will definitely be rereading this. This is 5 stars for me. I'm somewhat new to short story collections. This is maybe my 3rd, I think, that I've read, and I will definitely be reading more, and I can't wait to get my hands on Jen's new poetry collection. There might be a touch of me like fangirling here because Jen's a booktuber, and because I see her on YouTube all the time, I feel like I know her a little bit. But I don't think my enjoyment of it or my evaluation of it is necessarily affected by that. I think I would still have enjoyed it just as much or nearly as much if this was just a random author. I'm not sure. But what's interesting is because I have a sense of who Jen is from her booktube persona, at least, I could like hear her reading it in my head, and there are some snippets that I've heard her read samples of, and so there was one particular story that I had heard her read part of out loud. But it's really interesting when that happens, when I can hear her voice, and I felt like that actually added to it for me. So if you're not following Jen Campbell, you should follow Jen Campbell because she is brilliant, and you should read her books as well. Finally, we have The Help by Kathryn Stockett. This is number 16 on the Great American Read list. So I got 2. Was it just 2 or 3 altogether? So I managed to get 2 books off the Great American Read list completed this month, so that's exciting. I'm also reading a 3rd with my husband. We just haven't finished it. We're also reading The Martian by Andy Weir. So I know there's a great deal of controversy about this book. Reading some Goodreads reviews and seeing some star ratings on Goodreads was kind of interesting, and I think I get it. So I ended up listening to the audiobook of this. This was a book on tape production that I got off of my Libby library app, and it was a really good production. There were multiple voices. So for those of you who don't know the story, haven't seen the movie, this takes place in Jackson, Mississippi at the beginning of the civil rights movement. And we follow a few black maids who work for white families. Particularly, we see the interaction with the white females that the maids work for. And we have a character named Skeeter. It's her nickname because she's very tall and lanky and thin, and so she looks like a mosquito, So she's Skeeter, and she is really rubbed the wrong way by some of the comments that are made by these other white women kind of in her circle. These are mostly women who grew up going to school together. And the comments they make about the help and particularly the bathroom issue. So one of these wives comes up with the idea to have an initiative where they raise money to install an outdoor bathroom, basically in all the white homes, for the help to use the outdoor bathroom so they don't have to share with the help. And it's a sanitation issue, and it's a public health issue. And just really disgusting things like that. And so Skeeter is really appalled by this, and she is an aspiring writer, and she ends up, through a series of events, she ends up interviewing multiple maids, which a good part of the story is getting a maid involved, and as events in the civil rights movement start happening, appalling violence against blacks, particularly in Jackson, Mississippi, more maids become involved and are willing to take the risk and share their story. And I loved it. My favorite parts were the times with the maids, and my absolute least favorite part was the time with the white women, basically. Skeeter was interesting, but most interesting when she was interacting with the black maids. Now, there's a little bit of an uncomfortable factor, and the whole time I kept thinking, if this was written by a black author, particularly a black woman, there would probably be no problem with this book. But because it's written by a white woman, and because the story of these black maids is being told by a white woman, there's a bit of a sense of, oh, this white woman came in to save the day and share the stories of the oppressed black woman. And I get that, and I can't really explain it, but there's a bit of an uncomfortable feeling about that. So I don't know exactly what to do with that, but ultimately Skeeter, the white writer, is the catalyst for these black women to share their story and become empowered by sharing their story and gain some semblance of control and power in their community and with their employers. So I'm pretty interested in watching the movie. I know it had a lot of critical acclaim and was quite popular when it came out. So I'll probably get to that soon. But it's kind of interesting. There's like a weird kind of feeling about having the white woman come in to save the day. I really feel like if it had been written by a black author, that feeling wouldn't be there so much. So I don't know. It's kind of a sticky, racial issue there. It's an important story to be told, and I definitely enjoyed this story a lot. So, if you have any feelings on that, let me know. I'm very open to discussing that and finding out what you think about that. If you've read it or if you've seen the movie, if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate any comments and feedback that I get. Please let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts are, particularly on the Help or the Joy Luck Club as well. Thank you for watching. See you around the tubes.